Greetings, we are Rune Forge, I am Aaron.
And I'm David.
And we are talking about theater of the mind and how to use it in your game. Before we begin, we do want to say a huge thank you to Taking20 for letting us take over his channel today. And we are going to be talking about theater of the mind and the best way to use it in your game. Maybe you're someone who's having trouble with it. Maybe you're someone who has only ever played with a gridded map and terrain, and you've never used theater of the mind in order to play. Or maybe you just don't have access to any of that junk and you need some cool, kick-ass tips in order to use your mind hole in playing your tabletop role-playing game.
For those of you that don't know what theater of the mind is, it's when the DM uses his imagination to play the game. So you don't need a book, you don't need miniatures, you don't need terrain, you don't need pretty much anything to play except for your brains.
So we're going to give you some easy tips to use theater of the mind effectively for your players.
Tip number 1, describe everything. Don't go into too much detail, but you want to describe the places that they are, the monsters that they're fighting, the weapons that they find, to such a degree that they don't need a picture to tell them what this looks like. They've all got it right here in their brain because of you.
So they feel like they can hear, they can smell, they can see everything, and they're doing that through description. So tip number 2, if you're able, include some sound in your world. You can do this by adding music on your phone or adding ambient sort of sound effects like dripping water in caves or crickets in a forest at night.
So I would bring playlists of music or sounds and things like that on my phone, and I would play that while we were playing, and it kind of gives them a feel like, oh man, it gets them more immersed into it.
Adding something as simple as an ambient song or music or sound effects can really enhance theater of the mind and make it more believable and sort of draw your players into the world.
If you're good enough and you can kind of describe what's going on really well and have the sounds going on at the same time, you'd be surprised at how your players are going to be involved in what's going on.
You're like a DM DJ.
Tip number 3, throwing out mathematic movement.
You want to get all that boring shit like I can move 5 spaces, yada yada yada. You don't need none of that shit when you're doing theater of the mind. It's up to you as the dungeon master to really paint how far things are from each other, how far away they are from the monster. It becomes more of a question and answer game with your players. Well, how close am I? And instead of being like,
well, you're 35 feet, Timothy,
you can say things like,
you wouldn't be able to reach the monster in a full move. It may take you 2 full moves to get to him.
And in the meantime, they're getting peppered with arrows or something crazy.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing I hate more than when I'm playing a game where we're having to use theater of the mind, and then I'm like, okay, well, I attack this monster, and they're like,
you're not close enough.
well, how the fuck do you know I'm not close enough? There's no miniatures.
And that goes back to rule number 1, describing the world, letting them know how far you are. Remove the mathematic aspect of movement, and it will create a more organic and fun gameplay for your players to be involved in. Tip number 4, with theater of the mind, it's very easy to become the NPC.
So you want to, as the DM, envelop yourself in the characters that you create in the world. The more depth you give to the characters, the more I think the players are going to resonate with those characters. But as a DM, you have to remember, it's your job to give those characters depth. Don't just introduce an NPC and be like,
I sell stuff.
You can buy things from this guy. So you definitely want to make sure you keep these characters involved in the game. If you're going to introduce them, make them worthwhile and make your players feel like these NPCs are important.
And real and tangible.
Yeah.
And I know we both do this in our games sometimes. If you're meeting with a blacksmith, sometimes we'll actually be like, he's sharpening a knife, as he's talking to you. Or the person is counting gold out. Physically get involved in the theater of the mind. You don't have to dress up. You don't have to do a silly voice. But David's right. Make your character well-rounded and three-dimensional. Allow that NPC to come to life. Since you're already describing the way his garb looks, and you're already describing the way that he speaks through his nose.
Maybe he has a smell to him.
Exactly.
You walk in there and you can smell the stink from his ass crack.
Smells like just a filthy beggar.
Filthy beggar.
A filthy beggar.
And of course, it's always fun to add voices. You actually be surprised how much more people care when your character has a voice. If you walk into a blacksmith and you walk up and he's like,
hi, my name's John. I make swords.
I am generic blacksmith number 5.
But if you walk in, you're like,
hello there, my name's John. I create swords for the whole town. and you've come to me? Thank you. Give me your gold. I'll make you the best sword in town.
Later, John gets drunk and you have to like make sure he doesn't get into a fight.
Yeah, because you care. That guy had a British accent. I care about that guy.
And this is a great tip for any game you're playing, but it becomes supremely important in Theater of the Mind.
Tip number 5, depth and height.
It's really easy to play, a tabletop role-playing game, Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, and we're playing on a flat laminated mat that has sort of maps drawn on it, and it's really easy to forget that everything in the world isn't flat. If you're in a cave, there may be a sheared off cliff that is a chasm that falls down 150 feet into blackness that you can't see. When you're doing Theater of the Mind for your players, they can't just push their miniature around on a flat map. Their character is in danger. They can be pulled into this chasm and plummet to their death. And it's the same thing with water. How deep, what depth does this contain? How tall is the tower? They feel a real tangible world. The height and the depth matter. It makes your combat better. It makes describing things better. If they're climbing a tower and they can feel the wind pushing against them as they climb, nearly making them fall. Height and depth become something that terrain cannot explain and cannot give you. It can't be described on a flat paper map. It can only be described using Theater of the Mind and conveying that to your players.
It's a dynamic, fun way to make your game less boring.
And tip number 6 is projecting emotion onto your players.
So this is really important. As a DM, when you're creating your game, I'm going to give an example. You find a ring on the ground attached to a cut off finger. You pick up the finger and take the ring off, and you put it upon your own. And you begin to feel anger swell inside you. Anger that wasn't there before. Anger at things that make no sense to be angry about. So this is a perfect example of if a character finds an item, or let's say the character busts into a brothel and stabs a hooker in the heart. Anger that wasn't there before. And then he goes to jail. So as the DM, it's your job to go, okay, your character is going to be experiencing this emotion.
Exactly. And I think it's important that we don't tell them, this
is how your character feels about that. And that's the only way you would feel.
Because it's important to project the emotion without telling them this is how your character feels. Because, of course, we all know alignment affects how their character feels about certain situations.
Yeah. Well, and it's really up to the players to react upon what you've given them.
Exactly.
And it gives them an opportunity to roleplay.
Exactly. And you project that emotion toward them and let them know here's an opportunity for you to run with something. So
projecting emotion can be a really powerful tool to help engage your players in the game. And that is our 6 tips for using Theater of the Mind effectively in your game.
So guys, we want to thank you for watching. We do want to thank Cody again for allowing us to do this channel takeover. And definitely go over to our channel at Rune Forge. Check out our videos. And until next time, keep kicking ass. Over there at Rune Forge.
That old Rune Forge.
Down there at the old Rune Forge. He done did take over it. It's been taken over by Cody.
He's done take it.
Cody's done took it over down there. And, hell, we just don't know what to do. It's done been took over.